And we're going to share with you an Old Testament story of which most of you, if not all of you, are familiar, and that's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. When you pick up a Bible and start reading such a thing as Sodom and Gomorrah, the first thing that you have to do is make a decision. And I've kind of tried to sum it up in three choices that you have to make because there's a lot of difficulty as you go through the story. Let me tell you some of the things that you'll encounter as we go through the story, which makes it very difficult to accept a literal version. One, you have the question of God bargaining with man. That's number one. And you have to think, is that feasible? The second thing you have to have is the sexual promiscuity of the entire town. I mean, everybody in that town was a sex maniac, and there was nobody, absolutely nobody, who was clean, had their act cleaned up. So you got that. Now you got a third thing. You've got a man of God who tries to swap his daughters for sex to protect two angels. I mean, that's in the story. You have a man of God who is trying to push his two daughters out in the street and have sex so that he can protect two angels from, I guess, the gays in town or whatever. It's, this is and then you have another thing that is a little difficult, but of course you might be able to handle it, and that's a woman turning into salt. That's part of this tale. And then the finale of it are the two daughters get their father drunk and rape him. And it's all summed up in this little story in God's holy word, the Bible. You want to read this in Sunday school, and you certainly want to have Bible reading in schools. Well, this is what you've got. You've got a homosexual town. You've got a man of God selling his daughter for sex so that the two angels won't get involved. You've got a woman turning into salt. And you got the guy's two daughters getting him drunk and raping him in a tent. So, I mean, all of this, say, well, this is it. This is, you want to get up and read this Sunday morning or whatever. But that's what's included in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. But the choices that you have to make in approaching something as bizarre as this is to disregard unacceptable portions of and retain some. And I would say that that's basically where religion goes, because most of the preachers of the churches that you've been in, for the most part, have chosen to disregard. You heard about Lot's wife turning into salt and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, but many of you never knew that the two daughters raped their father after they got him stewed, or that the guy tried to get his daughters to have sex with the town so the two angels would be protected. There's not many preachers that get into that part of it, but yet it's in the Bible. It's part of God's holy word, You could do that. You could just take part of it. You could put the whole thing on the shelf and say, come on, it's a little ridiculous. Or you could seek within all of the, bizarre angles of it to find a mysterious and a very deep meaning. A rabbi by the name of Moses Maimonides of the 12th century, he said this. He said, "The greater the absurdity of the letter, the deeper the wisdom of the spirit." So that is really absurd. I mean, having your daughters go out and have sex so that two angels are protected. I mean, having sex with angels is a little absurd anyhow. But listen again to what he says. The more absurd it is to you, that the deeper is the wisdom of the Spirit. We're talking about, before you get into actually this beautiful little village or town of Sodom and Gomorrah, you have to get the beginning of the story with Abraham. And Abraham plays a part of this thing before we actually get to the gates of the city and involved with this fellow named Lot. But remember, in talking about Abraham, the Apostle Paul makes a very definitive statement in reference to Abraham and his whereabouts. And if you look at page 953, go to Galatians chapter 4, verse 24. There Paul is speaking of the activities of Abraham. In particular, do you remember the story about Abraham's wife having a baby when she was 100, whatever it is? And it goes on in, let's look at Galatians chapter 4, verse 22. It is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh. He of the free woman was of the promise. And in verse 24, a very startling statement made by Paul that most people, most religious people, most biblical scholars, most Christians really don't know. And that is, which things are an allegory. It's allegorical. And there the Apostle Paul is saying, don't take this stuff literally. Don't take it seriously of the letter. Understand it's a symbolic story. It has a deep spiritual meaning to it. Okay? So when you look at the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, remember that. And you should circle that page in your Bible, Galatians 4:24. Which things are an allegory? Sodom and Gomorrah is an allegorical play, an allegorical drama. It is naming people and bizarre incidents to point up deep spiritual things that happen within you and me. Now let's go to page 13 in your Bible, in the book of Genesis, and we'll look at Genesis chapter 18. Page 13 in those little Bibles, and Genesis chapter 18, verse 2. Well, let's look at verse 1, okay? The Lord appeared unto Moses, Genesis chapter 18, verse 1, in the plains of Mamre, okay? The plains of Mamre. Look at something here. You have two words, plains of Mamre, M-A-M-R-E, okay? The word plains in mysticism means confusion. You'll see a lot of that use of that word in the Old Testament in relation to, for instance, the construction of the Tower of Babel was in the plains. It means it was constructed in confusion. But here's the interesting part of this word. Where did God appear to you? Because Abraham is you. Okay. Where does he appear? In the confusion of your manliness. Now the women will say, oh, that doesn't, no, it's talking about mankind. In the confusion of your mind. In the confusion of your brain, in the confusion of your physical spirit, your physical entity, this is where God appeared. This is where God appears to all of us. So there, what happens? In the plains of Mamre, as he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day, in the passion of the day, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and 3 men stood by him. Okay. That number right there, the 3 men who stood by him, is simply there to tell you that what's going to happen in this story as it continues itself is there's going to be a newness. There's going to be a resurrection. There's going to be a new life that comes out of all of this. And the number 3 portrays that everywhere in the Bible. New life, resurrection, rising up. And it's interesting to say, notice that verse 2 of Genesis 18, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and 3 men stood by him. He raised himself up. See? Now the thing that you've got to see in this, or else it's not going to mean anything to you, you've got to see yourself portrayed in the story, because that's what the story is about. Sodom and Gomorrah did not happen in the context of the story. Lot's wife didn't turn to salt. Nobody threw their daughter out to protect angels and all of this kind of stuff. These are all allegorical references so that you can break the code spiritually and understand the deep truth. First of all, understand Sodom and Gomorrah, or Sodom, is your basest desires. That's the desires of the lower mind, okay? That's what it means. The word, or the person Lot, who you'll come upon, Lot is your carnal mind, your carnal consciousness, okay? Lot's wife is your emotional nature, okay? Your emotions. And the daughters are the desires of your emotions. So there you have Sodom, the lower mind, Lot, which is your carnal consciousness, and Lot's wife being your emotions. See, as simply as you get we're way ahead of the story, but as your carnal consciousness starts to rise up to the place, to the mountain of God, Lot going up the mountain, your emotions will turn, and your emotions will try to drag you back down, but the intercession of the higher divine principle will freeze that lower emotions, and you're then able to rise and continue your journey up to the mountaintop. Basically, that's what it's all about. Genesis 18, and we'll go to verse 3. Abraham says, if now I have found favor in your sight, pass not away, I pray, from your servant. Okay? And look what it says in Genesis 18:4. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched. Now, first of all, you have the movement with quote-unquote God in the story. You have the introduction of the word water, which is the second stage of consciousness and means truth. And it says, wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. So you have water, which is truth. You have feet, which is the part that touches the lower. And you have the tree, which is life, okay? In all ancient mystical tales, these things pop up. This, of course, was under the tree where Buddha became enlightened, you see. When the feet are washed, the feet represent that part of you that touches the earth. It means not the feet that are attached to your legs. It's talking about that part of you which touches the lower mind. That must be washed. And it's always washed, of course, with water. Water means truth. So all of these things enter into the tale and continue the mystical part of it. So, now, it says, rest yourselves under the tree, and I will fetch a morsel of bread and comfort your hearts so that you'll pass on, etc., etc. Now, the revelation of the purpose here is an interesting thing. And as we now have brought ourselves to the position of raising ourselves into that point of truth, which is the second stage of consciousness, which is water. That's the second stage. Look with me, because I think I'm losing you here. All right. Look with me what's happened here. What you've just seen is baptism. What you've just heard in this, let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. That is baptism. That is meditation. That's exactly what's happened. Your encounter with quote-unquote God has you touch water, which is the second stage of consciousness. The first stage of consciousness is earth. The second stage of consciousness is water. Okay? Now the feet being washed means you have separated. You are no longer touching that which is the lower. You have been purged of the thoughts of the lower mind. The feet are washed. And you are sitting under the tree of life, which is the inner tree, which blossoms within you, which is consciousness, which is meditation. So basically, the first thing that has happened here is in the center of your confusion, that which is quote-unquote God makes an appearance within your consciousness. You are touched by water, which is truth. You are separated from the lower mind, and you are now sitting under the tree of life. That's what's shown, and that's what's being seen here in that stage of this drama. But here's the interesting thing. We're gonna jump down, and because you get into the Abraham and Sarah thing, which we'll cover on another time, we're not going to cover that right now. We're going to go all the way down to verse 16. And the men rose up from thence and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. And this is verse 17. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? Now, let me show you where this attaches itself to the New Testament. If you look at Luke chapter 10, it's on page 844 in those little Bibles you. Look at Luke chapter 10. And on page 844, you'll come to Luke chapter 10, look at verse 21. I thank you, Father, heaven and earth, you have hid these things from the wise and the prudent, and have revealed them unto babes, so it seemed good in your sight. So the revelation then is, unto you is given to know the secret of the kingdom. To them that are without, all these things are parables. And so here then the question is, shall what is about to happen, shall the truth of what you're looking at be hidden from you, or shall it be revealed to you? And basically what this is saying is, it's up to you. You can understand these things as we've explained them, or you can let it pass. And for the most part, everybody who's ever heard of the story is trying to figure out whether it was an eruption of a volcano, or whether it was a meteor, what destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and all of these kind of things. Because Sodom and Gomorrah went the way of every city that's ever been created and has disappeared. They've all gone. Every culture that's ever lasted, none of them, they've all gone, just like this culture will go. But here, the question is, are you prepared and are you willing to understand the truth, or will you dwell on the outside in the confusion? Okay. Now let's go to Genesis, back to Genesis, page 13, and let's go to chapter 18. And in chapter 18, let's go to verse 22. Okay. And the men turned their faces and went toward Sodom. Now here's what's happening. You've got two with God, okay? Basically it makes up Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but in this particular realm of what we're talking about, you've got the three, you've got God, and you've got the inner part of you, which is, quote-unquote, the two angels, part of the Spirit, okay, represented by the Spirit within you. Now, the interesting part about this is that inner spirit began to rise to purge that fire. They went towards Sodom. The word Sodom, okay, means fire. Okay. The word Sodom means fire. And what is happening is there, now be with me here, the part of your spirit that is represented by the two angels are going to Sodom to purge that which is the passions of the lower flesh. Okay. The inner spirit. So the inner spirit, always that part of you is longing to rise up and to be part of God. That inner spirit is always rising to go and take action against the lower, to put down all of the emotions and all of the things which burn inside of you and have caused you all the problems. But something is interesting here. Look what it says. But Abraham stood yet before the Lord. See? In other words, this part of you says, I've got to know. I've got to find out. What you're doing right here, you come on Tuesday night, and the two angels, that part of you, the duality of you, goes to Sodom. It goes to purge down that which is the passions that burn within you. But there's the second part of you which must remain here and comes and listens and reads and studies and says, I've got to know. I've got to understand what the heck. In other words, Abraham was not content just to let them go. He said, I've got questions to ask you. I've got to find out what the heck is going on here. Because it was a moment ago when it said, should I reveal what's being done here? And Abraham said, yes, you should, because I want to know. It's not good enough for me to say, I'm going to come and sit and I'm going to raise my arms and I'm going to fly off in some kind of a meditation. Abraham, which is you, is saying, I have to understand what the heck is going on here. I've got questions that I need to be answered. I've got things that I have to understand, or else this doesn't make any sense to me. That's what's being said here. Because here you have the bargaining part. We're on the verge here of the part where Abraham is going to bargain with God. And he's going to ask God questions. And basically what's being said here is that each one of you have got to understand these things. You can't sit anymore and just let it, just like we had this morning. We're talking about the kingdom of heaven. Nobody in this room, I dare say you could go to any church in Ocean County or in New Jersey and just about any church, and nobody, I would say without a doubt, nobody will realize that the Greek word for heaven is translated out of the Bible is Uranus, which is the ruling planet now moving into the cosmos to affect us all. The kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of Uranus is at hand. But who knows it if you don't understand? If there's nobody to tell you, how are you ever going to know? Nobody will ever know. Here you are, right in the middle. It's just like being in your house and being in the bedroom and not knowing what's going on in the living room. That's exactly what it is. Oh, I don't know what goes on down there. I never go in that room. See? What if you're in a house and you hear some noises in the bathroom? Well, I don't go in there. See? I'm not allowed. My church doesn't allow me to go in there, so I never ask any questions. This is no different. This is a house. It's a family. And nobody knows anything about what the landlord is doing, what the people upstairs are doing, what's going on. Nobody knows. We just sit here. And you're sitting here on this ball in the universe, living, dying, never asking a doggone question. But here in this book, it says they went on, that part of you went on, but Abraham said, no way, I'm asking some questions because I want to find out. What the heck is going on? And you're told all your life, don't question anything. Even though Jesus said, seek, ask, knock, you're told, don't question anything. Don't ask any questions. But here Abraham, that part of you, stands in front of God and says, just a second, what the heck is this all about? Let's see what goes on. Verse 23. Genesis 18. And Abraham drew near. Okay? Only by drawing near can you know. Only when you draw near to that center can you know. There's no other way to know. Because when you go to the smartest teacher, you're far away. You've got to draw near. If you were to come in here If for instance, if I say to you, like that Holy Communion started with cannibalism, or if I said to you this morning that the wedding at Feast at Cana is a description of the new age of Uranus and Aquarius and all of this stuff, if you would run right up the stairs. I'm not going to stay and listen to this. This is crazy. But because you have opened yourself and the right side is energized, and that within you, the God within you is letting you see these things, you're beginning to understand things, universal things that you know are proven. And every time we've looked in the Bible, it's always in there. Everything we've looked to find. Can I find it in the Bible? Yes, every single time it's there. So Abraham drew near, and in verse 24, he said, well, in verse 23, he said, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Now, here's the interesting part where the bargaining goes on. Peradventure, in other words, well, what if there be 50 righteous in the city? Will you not spare the place? Should the righteous, be as wicked that, slay the good with the bad? And verse 26, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous, then I will spare all the place for their sakes, okay? Now look, spiritually, and try to understand what you're looking at here. The allegory or the play actually conveys to you something very, very important for your life. Salvation, you hear that word thrown around. What really is it? What's being conveyed here? Where there is something within you that begins to approach that beautiful narrow way, there will be salvation of your life. You call the shot. No God anywhere calls the shot. It's up totally to you. You find the narrow pathway, you set foot on it, there's salvation. And here's the way it breaks down in the code of what we're looking at, okay? Verse 26, if I find 50, the 50 relates to the spiritualization of the five senses. Sight, taste, touch, smell, hearing. If there is 50, and you have to understand the license and the liberty taken with allegory. We're talking about people in a town. So the number 5 becomes very important. And the number 5 says, if I find that there is a movement within the five senses of sight, taste, touch, smell, there'll be no destruction of that life. That life will prosper. Okay, good. Good. But now in verse 27. No, let's go now to verse 29. And he spoke unto him yet, and he said, well, wait a minute. Shall there be 40? What about 40? Now you've got the number of the fourfold nature of man. You have exactly the same thing as occurred in the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000. Here you have the five senses, which is sight, taste, touch, smell, and hearing. Here you have the fourfold nature. Okay? Physical, spiritual, intellectual, and emotional. If this spirit is starting to awaken the fourfold nature, there's going to be salvation. If the spirit awakens the five senses, there's going to be salvation. There'll be no destruction of your life. Okay? Now, let's go to verse 30. Let not me be... wait. But before we go to 30, let's go back to 28. There's an interesting thing there. We talked about 40. We talked about 50. But let's go back to 28. Peradventure, there shall lack 5 of the 50. Will you destroy for lack? And if I find there are 45? See? Now, because he said, well, wait a minute. What if the 50 are not there, but what if there's 45? Yeah. Now we've come to a center. We've come to a place between the 50. We come to a place between the fourfold knowledge. We've come to a bridge. And we've come to something very interesting. We've come to 50. We've come to 40. We come to 45. We come to 9. Always. Always. See, I could sit here and I could scream and shout and bang on the ceiling and kick things because it's always, not sometimes, always. It's talking about the mind, the human mind. And the numbers always come pouring forth. Hey, it's a yes, there'll be salvation of the human mind. Let's go down to verse 30. I said, don't get angry with me, but what about 30? Huh? The appearance of new life, the coming forth from the carnal. Oh, there'll be no death. The number 3, there'll be no death. Don't worry about it. That's good. Well, let's go to verse 31. But now, wait a minute. What about 20? What about 20? Now we got to the number of that which is the joining together of body and spirit. Even then, oh, maybe the five senses. Well, you know, if the five senses are spiritual, what about the fourfold nature? Hey, no problem with that. The new life, that if even if there's an attempt to, but even if there's just two, even if there's just that movement of body and soul coming together, there'll be that union of the male and female. But look what it says in verse 32. But don't be angry, but what about 10? If there's just 10, what will you do? He says, I won't destroy it. If there is just the movement of the presence of God within you. Oh, maybe it hasn't touched your five senses. Maybe it hasn't touched your fourfold nature. Maybe there's not new life in you. Maybe there's no union of body and soul. But if there's a spark in you that is of God, you'll be saved. See? Just a spark. Just what? How did Jesus put it? The grain of mustard seed. Just that little teeny bit. Basically, this is what you've worked yourself down to. That's what you've worked down to. So Sodom and Gomorrah is the place where we all dwell. Sodom and Gomorrah is the place of desire. But what is it about, you know? Because in the stories we get into town this week and next week, there's a lot of sexual perversion and so forth that this is stories about. But basically what it is this. Jesus is identified as the bridegroom, and we covered that this morning, okay? But Jesus is identified as the bridegroom. What happens here is when the Apostle Paul says, I may present you as a chaste virgin to one person, Christ. Peter says that you may be born again of an incorruptible seed. But Sodom and Gomorrah represents your turning away from intercourse with the female spirit, and instead of intercoursing with the female spirit, you're intercoursing with the male mind, and the seed is spilling on the ground. Okay? And so, then, the perversion. So an act, a physical act that is carried out in life is then dramatized this way, as well as adultery, or whatever you want to call it, whoredoms and all that kind of stuff, which is part and parcel of the Bible. All of this stuff is spoken of because what is necessary for the union or the birth to take place is that you present yourself as a chaste virgin in consciousness to be penetrated by the divine mind, which is Christ God, and then give birth to the Christ child, and new life comes forth. The intercourse happens that way. The intercourse cannot be between the physical part of the mind to the mind. It doesn't have anything to do with male or female in this. It's talking in allegorical terms. And how then this becomes abhorrent, if you would, to God. So that's basically what Sodom and Gomorrah means. It's turning away from intercoursing with the spirit and having your gratification with life caused by the intercourse with the mind. And all of us basically have spent our lives intercoursing with the mind. Everything that goes on in our mind is where we've taken from. We've not had the intercourse with the spirit, and therefore we've not been able to give birth within ourselves. See, that's why the virgin always gives birth in ancient religions and in Christianity. The virgin gives birth because the mind must be free of the stain of carnal thought. When the mind is free of the stain of carnal thought, then the child can be born. And the interesting thing, as we said this morning, is, we'll use Mary, for instance. Mary is made pregnant by her husband, who is God, so that she can give birth to him. So Mary becomes both the wife and the mother of God. And it's always that way. In all of the ancient myths, it's always that way. In Mary's case, the impregnation took place in the ear. She was impregnated in the ear by the word, so to speak, as we are. So then, God is her husband, and God is her son. You see. And as I said, that goes with all the myths, the ancient myths. So God's purpose, when we intercourse with the mind instead of intercoursing with the spirit, God's purpose is thwarted. He cannot give new life. The Christ within cannot be born. As I said, because the seed is spilled. There is no room for the seed to nurture and go into new life. So it has nothing to do with male or female other than as they represent the mind and the spirit. It doesn't make a difference if you're man or woman as we're talking about this. Your intercourse has to be, okay? The female part of you must intercourse with the male part. The male part must intercourse with the female part. But the male part cannot intercourse with the male part. And the male part of you, whether you're male or female, is your mind. The female part of you is your spirit. See? And your mind must intercourse with your spirit. But basically what Sodom and Gomorrah is talking about is your mind intercoursing with the flesh. When you live in the desires of the lower mind, you're living in Sodom and Gomorrah. When you refuse to enter the bridegroom's chamber that there may be a virgin birth, you're living in Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's what this is all about. Look at Genesis 19. And there came two angels. These are these two guys that walked off a little earlier in the story. They came to Sodom during the evening, and Lot sat at the gate. Now, here is Lot. The word Lot is an interesting word as far as the symbolisms mean. The word Lot means veil. Veil. He's not in Sodom, he's at the gate. And Lot is you. Lot is me. We spent our whole life looking through a veil. We've spent our whole life not understanding. I don't know what in God's name you believed before you came here. I don't know what in God's name I believed before I came here. But I never knew any of this stuff. I never even gave this stuff a second thought other than it was bizarre stuff that I wasn't, I never really took it seriously because I didn't understand it. I could make it, getting this computer and studying all of this stuff, it's like studying Chinese until suddenly you begin to understand these things, and then it starts to make sense. And like with the computer, when I'm learning, is that once you begin to understand, you can do miraculous things. But if you don't understand, you can push the wrong buttons and just drive yourself crazy. And that's what we do. We push all the wrong buttons and we drive ourselves crazy because we don't understand. Once we figure it out and understand, when we start pushing the buttons and things start happening. And beautiful things start happening. And results start coming, you see. But here is Lot, which means the veil, and he's sitting at the gate of all of this perversion. Not sexual perversion. Get that out of your mind. It has nothing to do with that. It's just a perversion, being perverted with our attention focused on life as it shouldn't be instead of at life as it should be. I want to show you about where it says Lot sat at the gate. Look at page 466 in your Bible in the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms and Psalm chapter 9. Okay, page 466, Psalm chapter 9. And verse 13, have mercy upon me, consider my trouble, which I suffer of them that hate me, you that lifts me up from the gates of death. And that's basically what's being said here. As you sat at the gate of destruction, and how many of us that had no idea, don't you see, look, inside of your head is Sodom and Gomorrah. How many of us sat at the gate of that disaster having no idea what was going to happen, having no, other than the fact that I'm screwed up, things aren't going right, and then the two angels came along. That impulse came along to speak to us, to touch us, and then we started our move to escape. Basically, what this is all about here, first of all, you have Abraham setting up as that part of you, trying to identify what this is about, what's going on, what will it take in order for salvation. Then you enter with Lot, that part of you that sits at the gate of destruction, and then God's forces come, and what happens? You are allowed to escape. It is basically your getaway from all of the confusion, breaking out of the lower mind up into the higher mountain realms. Okay, so let's say chapter 19. And there two angels came to Sodom. Lot sat in the gate, and Lot, seeing them, what did he do? Rose up to meet them. He always rises up to meet them. We rise into higher realms of consciousness to meet them. See? God's messenger, blowing as a wind, beckoning you to come up higher, come up higher, come up higher. But now look what he does. He bows himself with his face to the ground. Meditation. That's a meditation. When you have that impulse, when you have that thing that's starting to tug you away from the Sodom and Gomorrah of your soul, the thing that you do is go into meditation. Bowing your face to the ground, and you see people in the East do that physically. They get on their little carpets and bow their face to the ground. Basically what you're doing is you're pulling down your own intellect. The face always means your intelligence. Face in mysticism means your intelligence. You're subverting your own intelligence. You're putting down your own understanding, your own wisdom, your own traditions. All of the things that were important to you, you're putting them down, see? Your intellect. You do not exalt your knowledge. Now look what it says here. And he said, behold now, verse 2, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house. Tarry all night, wash your feet, you shall rise up early and go your ways. And they said, no, we will abide in the street all night. Now, it's very, very important. Here, once again, we have that same baptism we talked about a little while ago. You know, stay at night during the dark time of the soul, the foot washing and all that kind of business. But they make as if, no, we don't want to do that. Now, I want to show you something, if you will. If you look with me at page 863 in Luke 24. Okay, page 863, Luke chapter 24. I want to show you something that, you know, is pretty interesting. In Luke, I went too far. Luke chapter 24 and page 863. Go to verse 28. All right. This is where Jesus was on the road to Emmaus with, not the road to Emmaus, the road from the crucifixion. I guess it was the road to Emmaus with the two men. Okay. Luke 24, verse 28. Okay. And they drew nigh unto the village where they went, and he, that means Jesus, as though he would have gone further, but they constrained him, saying, abide with us, for it is too evening. The angel said they will not come in, they will stay in the street. Jesus made it as if he would go on. And what's being said there is that it's up to you. You've got to invite this in. You've got to bring this spiritual reality into you. There is nobody, nowhere, that's going to have this spirit move in on you, force its way in on you, and it's simply saying to you, it's up to your free will. Your free will is strong. You have to give that spiritual room within you to be sure. You have to do that. And nothing going to do it for you. So then when you say, okay, this is what I want to do, and Lot is making up his mind that this is what he wants to do, you have to realize the cost that you have to pay. We were talking a little while at lunch this morning about the activity that this young girl, Sinead O'Connor, took in ripping up the picture of the Pope. She's making a statement. She probably never met the man, had nothing against the man. But when you make a statement against the society and against the traditions of the system, you have to be prepared to pay a big, big price for that. And some in our group, as we're sitting, said, well, you know, maybe it's a little tough to come off at the system like this. It is, you know. It is very tough. But sometimes, unfortunately, it's the only way that you get their attention. As long as you're prepared to pay the price. In moving into this particular realm of life, it's very difficult for you. Most of you that come here probably are very reluctant to discuss what you study and what you're into, because there's too many people that surround you who are, you know, traditional people with traditional concepts, and they can be very offended by this type of thing. So you have to count the cost. Once you invite that essence into you, and you don't write, well, okay, come on in. Once you submit, what happens is you open the door, and once that comes in with inside, it's in. And you're going to find that your life is going to be very, very difficult if once you've invited it in, you run a different direction, because you're still dwelling with that electrical energy inside of you, and it's not going to go away. So you have to be sure you're willing to allow yourself to do this. See? It's easy to say, and I hear, oh, Jesus, come into my heart. But, you know, what does it mean? You look at the people that said, Jesus, come into my heart, and 10 years later, you know, it's complete destruction. But I see with the people that come in here, did you ever notice, I'm not saying the people that come in here don't have difficulties, but the people that come in here, once they make this real commitment that they physically and mentally and electrically open themselves and this energy starts to flow, they become different people. Totally different people. The way you think is different, the way you react is different, and there's no way that you can come back. In the midst of everything you're surrounded by, no matter how the world is, how the situation is, you become a different person. Completely different person. And I'll show you too. You can look, and I don't wish this, I'm not saying, but you can look at the people who have opened themselves and then walk back the other way, and you'll see all hell breaks loose. All hell breaks loose because once you have allowed that energy to come into your mind, it is there. And as you go back and try to resume your life in the way that it was before, that energy is running rampant within you, and it'll smack every aspect of you to try to drive you back in. And to the point where you can actually get sick by it. That's one of the, in the Bible it says that that's called blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, that there's no forgiveness of it. And the reason for that is once you have opened and let it in, there's no way to get it out. It can't leave. You can go around about your own business and not have any problems if you don't let it in. But once you let it in, it's like a bat. And it's flying all over your head, and you can't get away from it. You have to understand one thing. As we got to this point where they're invited in, and we're born-again Christians, and I asked them this, and I would say this, what the heck is the sense of inviting Jesus into you if you're afraid to go into you? Go in, but I ain't going in there. So as we wrap this up, before we get in, next week we'll get into the more, what would you say, R-rated side of Sodom and Gomorrah. But there are several spiritual references that you might want to take with you for this part of it. One, you have two angels, which is the union of your physical and spiritual aspect of your body. The second thing that you've just seen is come into your servant's house. You're inviting that part of spirit into you to be the landlord, if you would, of your house, of your mind. The third thing, it says, tarry all night. That's your prayer in the time of deep need. In other words, stay with me. What you see as similar to that is in the story of Joshua. What did Joshua do in battle? Made the sun stand still. Basically, he stayed in that light during the real difficult time. Most of us are pretty good at that. We don't necessarily stay in the light when, there's no trouble. But as soon as all hell starts to break loose, then we're pretty good at meditating. Meditation is very popular when we're in trouble, and that's fine. The fourth thing you had was the foot washing again. Remember, that part of you that touches the earth is the part of you that touches the mind, and that has to be washed and that has to be cleansed. And the fifth thing is where it says, rise up early. That's what you do. You rise up early because you are touching the first ray of light. The first ray of light that comes in the midst of the darkness of the dark part of your soul is called morning. That's where you rise up early. That's where Jesus is called the bright morning star. It's the first light at the end of a very dark period. So here then we've had the situation. Abraham got himself involved in it. He said if there's 50, if there's 40, if there's 30, and we went into the numerology part of it, and it explained to you the different aspects of you as a human being. And then that part of you, which is the angelic part, moved off to quench the burning flames of the passions of the lower mind, heading for Sodom and Gomorrah. And there's that second part of you, that Lot, which is unsure, which is still looking for a veil, sitting at the gate of this destruction and rising up now to greet this heavenly group that's come to help to free you from the Sodom and Gomorrah of your soul. And then what has happened is you have made a commitment to invite them into your house. And though they said they would not enter into your house, they will. Now, next week, as we go on with this, there will be an unruly mob of sexually stimulated, bizarre people banging on your door, and you will have to make a choice, because actually what they don't want anything except to have sex with the two angels that are hanging out in your house. So that gets pretty interesting, and we'll deal with that next week. Oh my, God's holy word. But that's interesting. Thanks a lot for part one of Sodom and Gomorrah.